he really was the last person you would associate with something like this.
Brian Blackwell had written to his ex-girlfriend Amal from prison, begging to see her. After first refusing, she decided to confront him face to face.
The thing which shocked her the most to the core was the fact that A, he could have lied to her like that, and B, she could have believed it. So when she went to see him in prison, that was what she was asking him over and over again. And she describes him as still being in denial. Like him, her coping mechanism is a kind of denial. And there are, I think, underneath that, feelings of guilt that she didn't see the warning signs when she could have done.
The case was always presented and prepared as one of murder. There were sufficient inconsistencies and lies told by Brian Blackwell with his dealings with his family, with the banks, that would enable us to present this as somebody who killed his parents for reasons of financial greed.
But prosecutors were faced with a surprise twist when they received the psychiatric reports. The reports concluded that Brian was suffering from NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, which made him obsessed with fantasies of success, power and brilliance. They said the brutal killings were the result of a narcissistic rage, not premeditated murder.
It is an unusual case because normally one would not accept a plea to diminish responsibility, but perhaps put all the evidence before the jury and invite them to make their mind up. But this was a case where just before the trial started, all the evidence was pointing towards the fact that Brian Blackwell was suffering from this particularly severe form of NPD, and it would have been entirely inappropriate to prosecute him for murder in the full knowledge that the experts who would have given evidence in the trial would have come to the same conclusion.
We ultimately don't know what prompted him to kill his parents. There are possibilities which might fit in with his narcissistic personality. The first is that somehow or other the fantasy life that he created collapsed like a house of cards. He was going on holiday. He intended to spend a large amount of money. His parents were not going to permit this. And that this caused such an outburst of rage in him that he became murderously angry and killed his parents at that stage. There is, of course, an alternative possibility, and that would tend to indicate that his personality disorder is actually even more severe than most of the cases that one usually encounters, and that's that he was utterly callous, that this was planned, and that he effectively just dispatched his parents because they stood in his way.
But at Liverpool Crown Court, the judge and prosecution team accepted Brian's guilty plea to 2 counts of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. It meant Brian Blackwell would not have to face trial by jury.
It's very easy to misjudge these killings and to assume what Brian did was cold and calculated, and in fact all the evidence points to it being precisely the opposite. The prosecution, with all their experience, a very senior judge would not have accepted that manslaughter was the appropriate plea unless they were persuaded by a great weight of medical evidence that Brian was suffering from narcissism.
During his court hearing, Brian Blackwell made efforts to show his remorse and how he was facing up to the enormity of the atrocities he'd committed.
He read a letter out at court, and during the course of the letter he talked about the options he'd taken in hospital for anger management and coming to terms with what he'd done. But in actual fact it is exactly what the psychologists predict that he would do, that he would become, as he probably was when free, he would become a model prisoner just as he was a model son. And that would be very difficult for them to distinguish about a genuine attempt to rehabilitate himself and an attempt in actual fact to defraud the parole system.
Sentencing him to life, the judge said Blackwell had shown breathtaking callousness in his chilling crime. He told him, "For a son to do this is almost beyond belief. But you are no ordinary son."
What, of course, the judge did do was take account of Brian's age, and he took properly into account that this is a plea to manslaughter rather than murder, and the life sentence was discretionary rather than mandatory. So at the same time, Brian is eligible to apply for parole in 5.5 years' time. And that's a reasonably short period, because it reflects that should he make significant and sufficient progress whilst he's in custody, and once he's assessed by experienced psychiatrists, if he poses no danger to the public, then there's no reason at all why he shouldn't be released in 5 or 6 years' time.
Whether his expectations are that he will be released, I think that's probably something he's actually quite realistic about. That the chances are that, if ever, it will be a long, long time in the future.
Following fire crews, paramedics, ambulance teams, doctors and nurses as they make split-second life or death decisions, Steve Scott is back with more Night Watch coming up next here.